recently, you may or may not have come across this little piece of news that President Biden is investing up to $1.2 billion to advance the development of 2 commercial-scale direct air capture facilities. Now, from just hearing that, you may be like, what the heck is all of that? So that's why I'm here, and today in EcoFiles, I'll be explaining what direct air capture is and what are the implications of these 2 projects that President Biden has been investing in. So first, we're going to cover what direct air capture is. And direct air capture captures CO2 directly from the air and reducing the atmospheric concentration of CO2. And so you may ask, how does that work? Well, in the short summary I'm going to give, basically air gets sucked through the fans and it passes through a filter where the CO2 gets captured there and then the rest of the air comes out. So now to dive deeper into it, air with CO2 is drawn in through a fan located inside the collector, and once sucked in, it passes through a filter located inside the collector, which traps the CO2 particles in a process called absorption. So what that means is just air, it's coming into the fans, and it's going to the filter, and CO2 is just getting captured in there. So the filter itself contains a liquid solvent or a solid sorbent. That's just fancy word for like a solvent, basically. And which using a process called absorption, which we talked about, where a gas, in this case CO2, chemically binds to a substance due to its intermolecular forces and attaches to it molecularly. So, in simple words, basically the CO2, when it goes into the filter, it attaches to a substance and chemically binds to it, and it just stays there for now. And the most common filter material is potassium hydroxide, a liquid solvent. And so what happens is when CO2 combines with it, there's actually a chemical reaction that happens, and it produces potassium carbonate, potassium carbonate is just a carbon-based salt, and it also produces water. So then the carbon-based salt, potassium carbonate, is reacted with calcium hydroxide to form calcium carbonate. And basically, what that means is that the salt is reacted with this substance called calcium hydroxide to form another substance called calcium carbonate. Now you may ask where this calcium hydroxide came from, and remember that back there when the CO2 reacted with the potassium hydroxide, it formed the salt and the water. So to form the calcium hydroxide, basically you combine water with another substance, calcium oxide. So there's a lot of chemistry involved in this. Okay, so once the filter is completely full of CO2 in the calcium carbonate state, the collector closes and the temperature rises. So now you may ask why we have to heat up this. Well, we basically have to heat it up so that the calcium carbonate separates to calcium and CO2. So that way you get all this reaction, this complicated reaction process, and you end up with just CO2. And then so you create CO2, and the calcium is then created, it creates a calcium oxide byproduct, which we'll use later, if you recall, to react with the water. Well, that's my dog over there. I have no idea what she's doing, but we'll continue. So once the CO2 is released, you can do a lot of things with it. One thing you can do is you can pump the CO2 into the ground using a bunch of pipes, and you can pressurize the CO2 so that it pumps into the ground. And so it goes into the ground so that it can never go back up. Again, it's basically just stored there for all of eternity. Or what else you can do with the CO2 is you can sell the CO2 that you captured in the carbon capture process, and you can sell it to like steel and other companies that need CO2 in their products. So like a wide variety of products use CO2. For example, like I said, steel use it, not seal, but steel uses it. Also in footballs, they use a little bit of CO2 in the leather. Same with nail polish remover, surfboards. A lot of people use CO2. Or the sad reality is a lot of these direct air capture companies, we'll just call them carbon capture companies, but a lot of them do it is they sell it back to oil companies. And you may ask, why would they need the CO2? Well, high pressurized CO2, what it can actually do, it can force the oil in the ground to go upwards through the wells, and that way the oil companies can extract more oil using this high pressurized CO2. So sad reality is a lot of the CO2 from there gets sold to these companies. But the good news is that since our American government is investing and giving money to these companies to create a couple projects for them, what's going to happen is the CO2 is just going to go straight to the ground. So none of the other things going to happen. Speaking of which, let's go back to those two projects that President Biden was investing in. So the first project it was investing in is called Project Cypress, and this is going to be taking place, I'm sorry if I butchered the name, Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana? Yeah, no, I'm so sorry if I butchered that name. I probably did. And it's run by this company called the Climeworks Corporation and by the Heirloom Carbon Technologies Inc., which is a mouthful to say. But it aims to capture more than 1 million metric tons of CO2 per year from the atmosphere and store it permanently in the Gulf Coast ground. And this project is estimated to create approximately 2,300 jobs, with the goal to hire workers formerly from fossil fuel industries. And that is probably one of the greatest things here because, well, renewable energy is eventually going to replace fossil fuel energy, and millions of people who work in the fossil fuel industry won't have a job anymore. So it's good that they're hiring people from the fossil fuel industry so that they get experience and they get work, so that eventually, once the fossil fuel industry is done, they can go towards these renewable energy companies and work for them. And also, what else is good with this project is Project Cypress will implement a robust two-way communication program with local communities and stakeholders to give their input about the project, which is amazing in itself. And sorry, I just had a bit of a thing. But anyways, the next project, which is in South Texas in Kleberg County. Sorry if I butchered that again. So this second project is going to be taken on by 1.5, which is a company owned by this petroleum company called Occidental. And while that may seem suspicious, don't worry. The CO2 is going to go to the ground and not go to Occidental. But anyways, Carbon Engineering is also working with it, and this project seeks to develop and demonstrate a direct air capture facility, which is what we talked about previously, designed to remove up to 1 million metric tons of CO2, which same as the last project, and it's going to store it in the ground again. And this project is estimated to create 2,500 jobs in construction, operations, maintenance, and they already have an existing local agreement to hire people locally, so no one from Occidental is like going to go to these projects. They're going to hire new people. And they're also in the project establishing a citizen advisory board, and basically it's going to be made up of a bunch of citizens, and they're going to put their input on how the project is going and how it's helping or hindering their community. So now that we went through those two projects and what it means, so now let's take it all into a larger and a whole perspective. So in our world, there's currently 1.5 trillion tons of CO2 in the air, which, yeah, that is a lot. But don't worry, it accounts for less than 1% of all the gases in our atmosphere. And so, of that 1.5 trillion, the U.S. is accountable for emitting 400 billion tons of that 1.5 trillion. So, and this year, or this past year, 2022, the U.S., we emitted 1.539 billion metric tons of CO2. So, if both of those projects are capturing 1 million tons of CO2, that really means that we would just capture 0.13% of the CO2 that we emitted with those two projects. So now, that may not sound like a lot, but there is some optimism. So, although, as we know, there's a lot of CO2 and other greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide and methane, we now can capture CO2 and these two projects will hopefully demonstrate that. So if they are successful, maybe the U.S. government will implement more projects. And so we would need like about 1,537 more projects than what we have to capture all our air. But don't worry, I mean, those projects just take up about 105 acres of land, which sounds a lot, but it's really just it's very small number. And if we were to use all of these projects and combine their acreage, they would just use 0.00665% of the land in the U.S. So not a lot of land they use to capture all of the CO2 we emit. And you may ask about the money, how much money it would take to create those 1,537 more projects. Well, let's say we know that Biden is funding $1.2 billion to those two projects. So it would be about $600 million per project. And if you do the math, to fund all of those projects, you would need $923.4 billion. So now that sounds like a lot, but you gotta understand, we're a really rich country. Our GDP is $22.3 trillion. So that's not how much cash we have on hand, but that's how much infrastructure and assets we also have, including to the cash we have on hand. So it is possible that over a period of time, let's say 5-10 years, that we can create some of those assets to cash or generate more cash, and we could invest those that $923.4 billion into these direct air capture facilities. And at that point, we would go net zero from carbon, although there are other greenhouse gases that are emitted, like methane and nitrous oxide. But that's for another episode. So now an alternative to direct air capture is planting trees, which it does the whole process we explained naturally through natural systems. But I mean, one tree per year only captures 48 pounds of CO2, which still is a lot for one tree, but it would take a heck of a lot of trees to capture a lot of the CO2 we produce. But with trees, it can also help rebuild the natural ecosystem of the U.S., which is a positive, but again, that's another topic for another episode. Thanks for watching on this episode of Ecofiles. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're a rapidly growing podcast. or video podcast, and we would love your support. Well, anyways, tune in next time on Eco Files.